welcome back to my channel. Today I will be showing you all new watercolor sketchbook which I received as a birthday gift from my sister, and I am really happy that I finally got this sketchbook which I wanted to buy a very long time ago. Almost when Hahnemuhle launched this watercolor sketchbook and cannot wait to create lot of painting on it. But before that, I wanted to test out how actually this watercolor paper works with different watercolor techniques which I use the most. So let's get started. As you can see that this gift set which sister gave me come from Deva as Art Gallery. I received Hahnemuhle watercolor sketchbook with some sample papers of watercolor, cold press, hot press and rough paper too. I also received a gift from Deva as Art Gallery. They sent me Hahnemuhle zigzag watercolor book. But as per today, I will be only testing out this watercolor sketchbook. I will be share about other paper reviews soon. As we can see, there is simple information label on cover with nice painting on it. It says that this sketchbook made a 100% cotton fiber cold press, 250 GSM or 120 lbs. This A4 size watercolor sketchbook which has total 60 pages. This watercolor paper is made in Germany, and the sketchbook comes in different formats including landscape and portrait size. This one is landscape format sketchbook. It has 30 jet black cover and it got rubber binder there, and if you open it up you will see nature white on paper. You can see that each paper is stitched properly in the same size. With the stitch, there are 2-3 papers also nicely glued together, which is different from other watercolor sketchbook, which is really great. Although the paper size inside the book is slightly smaller than cover itself, which will help to keep the paper corners safe. As you can see, this brightly white paper has nicely textured surface which is thick enough to hold water for wet on wet watercolor technique. Alright, let's start testing out this paper. I will be using this first paper which is glued with cover of the sketchbook because I don't want to waste any paper of the sketchbook since the sketchbook is a bit expensive one. As you can see that I have already applied masking fluid for watercolor masking technique because it's important that masking fluid need to dry fully, otherwise it will tear off the paper easily when you are removing. The first technique is wet on wet, which I use the most for landscape and portrait painting and others too. Wet on wet, it simply means wet paint on a wet surface. This is a beautiful technique for landscape and creating soft edges. This technique helps to create beautiful atmospheric visual. As you can see how to color mixing and creating soft edges, which is really interesting. Seeing this watercolor sketchbook made for wet on wet techniques and especially for professional watercolor artists. So I am expecting a better result. The second technique is wet on dry, which I use the most. Wet on dry means applying wet paint on a dry surface. This is fundamental watercolor technique. It's demand for some patience. This technique also is to create sharp edges and some details when you are working on portrait and still life. Looking at this result, we got beautiful edges, also two colors blended very nicely. The third technique is that applying dry paint on a wet layer. It also means your paper should be wetter than your brush. Here I have given wet layer and then started giving dry paint, which is slightly diluted with water. This technique used to create subtle details and depth in the painting. We are seeing the non-diluted color appearance look more vibrant. This dry technique similar to dry brush technique which work better on texture surface paper. It's excellent for adding texture brush stroke. Here I have applied slightly diluted color and then making grass using dry brush which is not too wet and not too dry. This technique works best with flat brush. One thing I noticed that when I was doing flat wash using wet on wet technique, the color flow very nicely and after that flat wash has dried, it looked more soft but lighter than wet on dry flat wash. Glazing is another word or layering. Glazing means it's all about how we build up the shade from light shade to darker shade. I added some yellow green, then added bit of violet color, and then for darker shade added some crimson and violet color. I'm working fast here, but once I want to start on a project, I will do layer by layer work. Of course, I have to wait first layer to dry. I think this paper will be best for glazing or layering, since it's really good at wet on wet and wet on dry. Alright, now I am doing watercolor masking technique. Be sure your masking fluid is fully dry before adding paint on it. I will be doing wet on wet background first. You are seeing how color flow on this paper while adding light and darker paint. Let's wait for the background to fully dry. Then I will start removing masking fluid. The next technique is lifting the paint while the paint is fully dry and when the paint is still wet. When I added the blue paint on the paper and simply lifted the color using tissue paper and clean brush, it lifted very well. As you can see, some white area created after lifting some wet paint, but honestly, it takes little more time than 300 GSM cold fresh paper. Later, I tried to lift the paint when the layer is fully dry using clean brush and tissue paper. It took me a little time to lift the paint and honestly, it did not work well. I think it's very common in 250 GSM cold fresh watercolor paper since it's not too thick like 300 GSM paper. Alright, let's move on to watercolor dry brush technique which I use the most for landscape painting. The first brush stroke I will giving the slightly dry and dry it with using tissue paper. Again I am using tissue paper to remove excess water and pigment from the brush. You are seeing that the brush is a bit drier than before and gives a different brush stroke. You can see more white holes on the line than the previous slightly dry brush stroke. Now I am taking out all excess water to make brush hair fully dry. And now you are seeing how beautiful dry brush stroke creating some white effect while the brush is moving on the paper. Let's move back to the watercolor masking technique when I am removing the dried masking fluid after the background has fully dried. The dried fluid dripped off the paper on middle part, but it did not drip off the paper on other area. I think we need to be careful while using this technique since this paper is not made like 300 GSM paper. I think some light masking fluid which come off easily will help. Here I used some trick to hide dripped off paper area. Use dark paint to hide it But honestly, I'm really happy with this outcome of masking fluid technique. The thing is, I just need to be careful while working with masking fluid. Now I am using Current Layer Brush Pro, which is dry liquid ink brush pen, mostly used for calligraphy. Let's see how it works. You are seeing the brush pen strokes are bending very nicely and not looking messy. I think the paper have ability to hold dry liquid ink, which is quite good. Also, this liquid ink flow very nicely with water on this paper. I am really impressed with how the ink looks so vibrant than traditional watercolors after it has dried. Here now I am using watercolor ink, basically similar to previous ink brush pen. Here I am using dry on wet, meaning I wetted the surface of paper and without diluting ink with water, I am directly adding onto the paper surface. We are seeing how the ink flow on the paper and create a beautiful visual. This watercolor ink also look vibrant and bright after they have dried. This last technique is not watercolor technique, but I want to try this acrylic marker to see how it flow on paper surface. We are seeing it was similar to brush pen. Both look bright and vibrant on paper surface, which is really amazing. Looking at this performance of this paper, I think this paper work really great with different watercolor technique, especially with on-wet technique. Just like the how mentioned, I like how dry brush technique work on this paper and how watercolor ink look bright and vibrant after it has dried, which is quite impressive. Alright, now I am going to paint watercolor portrait with freehand background without using pencil. Seeing how the watercolor blended very beautifully on cloth area. I worked here very slowly and steadily. problem is that I did not wetted the area of background here and started adding wet paint onto dry surface, and I got some dark edges there. But after adding some final details, after that layer is dry, it looking now fine. But when I was making window using wet on wet, and the result turned out very beautiful. Honestly, trying this all techniques and making this portrait, I really impressed with this paper. I think other small size watercolor sketchbook will be best option for travel and plein air watercolor, and this bigger size will be good for professional artists who can handle heavyweight sketchbook easily during travel or plein air watercolor. Thank you for watching.